Well, good morning, everybody. Excited to be here this morning after a long evening of bringing to the end the longest legislative sitting in the history of the province. This current session of this sitting started on October 25th with the government introducing the Labour Mobility Act to knock down employment barriers and attract more skilled professions all across Alberta. That was then followed immediately by large investments totaling $10 billion that will create more than 16,000 new jobs, including the largest investment in Alberta technology sector from Amazon Web Services. Alberta's government also secured a deal on childcare that will cut daycare fees for Alberta families on average starting in January 2022. We also saw the second quarter fiscal update, which showed one of the most dramatic improvements to provincial finances in Alberta history, with a stunning $12.4 billion decrease in the deficit. The session also ended with government MLAs passing motions expressing solidarity with the 20 First Nation band councils and the communities situated along the Coastal GasLink route that wish to benefit from the jobs and the prosperity that that project will create. Our province has recovered all the jobs lost since the start of the pandemic. According to the November jobs report, the province gained 15,000 jobs in November alone. Now, during the fall sitting, Alberta's government passed numerous bills that fulfill the promises on affordable housing, conserving our environment, and bringing more transparency to infrastructure spending. During the fall sitting, Alberta's government passed 15 bills that completed a variety of platform commitments that we were very, very excited about. Some of the highlights, of course, would be the Labour Mobility Act, which again knocks down significant employment barriers, making it easier for more skilled professions to come to Alberta. The Infrastructure Accountability Act, which brings transparency to capital spending into the capital spending process for taxpayer money. The Municipal Government Restoring Tax Accountability Act, which restores the special lien that municipalities can use to collect unpaid oil and gas taxes. The Alberta Housing Amendment Act, which provides more transparency on affordable housing, as promised. Of course, the Election Statutes Amendment Act, which bans foreign money from Alberta politics and establishes a set election date. The Mineral Resource Development Act, which modernizes Alberta's regulatory on critical and rare earth metals. The Environmental Protection Enhancement Act, which finally brought EPR to our province after decades of promises from other governments. And the Education Statutes Amendment Act, Students First, which will increase student safety by providing more transparency and accountability in teacher discipline matters. It was a busy legislative session with a lot going on. It really shows that Alberta is back on track. I do hope that all members of the legislature are traveling safe home this morning in the bad weather, and thank them for all of their hard work this fall. Look forward to calling the House back in the winter session after Christmas and getting right back to work on even more platform commitments and legislation that will keep Alberta moving forward. With that, I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Minister. We'll start with the floor with one question, one follow-up.
Sounds good. Shaylan Skolsky, CTV News. My question actually relates to Bill 81 specifically. Last night, several members of your own party spoke out against the Justice Minister's interpretation of the law that allows people to buy memberships for others. Several UCP MLAs say they wanted to see people require permission for such things and raise concerns of special interest groups buying up nominations. What do you say to that dissent coming from within your own party?
Well, I think it's a great thing. I think it really highlights the difference between the United Conservative Party and the official opposition, for example, but other parties within the Westminster system in our country, but particularly in our province. When we were fortunate enough to form government 2.5 years ago, I put into the standing orders the ability of members to be able to express differences when they disagreed with the majority of their caucus. And what you saw last night is democracy and a big tent party and a big tent coalition working together to be able to make sure that members can express views that they may be hearing. I will also point out that while 3 members certainly had that opportunity to express their differences to their colleagues and did, you saw the largest amount of government members ever in the legislature, likely at 3 o'clock in the morning, well more than was needed for that shift, making clear that the vast majority of caucus sees it differently. And so we'll always continue to be able to facilitate opportunities for us to express our differences when we have them. That's what a big tent coalition is all about. The alternative to that is what you see the official opposition do, which is fully whip all votes and force members not to be able to express their differences. So that's one. 2, again, I would agree with the minister that we should not be getting involved in managing the affairs of private clubs, which is what a political party is. The next step to that is that what do we do next? Start to interfere with the membership process of cross-country ski groups or the local fish and game club or the local church? Of course not. And the legislature needs to make decisions for all political parties. We have political parties that give away memberships, actually within their bylaws, that they don't charge for a membership. And so we got to make sure that legislation that passes does not impact other parties just because we're trying to manage our party. To be clear, our party, the United Conservative Party, has clear bylaws and clear rules that do not allow for the purchasing of memberships for other people, with the exception, and you have to confirm with the party exactly how it's written, of somebody's direct spouse and minor children. And that's where that issue should be dealt with, is within party mandates and within private club mandates, and not by the legislature, because the unintended consequences of that could be that we end up interfering with another political party, which should not happen and will not happen anytime under our watch.
Follow-up question?
Yeah, follow-up question. Another aspect of that same bill regarding third-party advertisers. Despite amendments, the NDP say this bill could be subject to court challenges for violating free speech. How confident are you that it would withstand such charter challenges?
Very confident, and a challenge has happened on many things. Whether or not a challenge is successful is what matters. The Department of Justice worked on that legislation for well over a year, including an all-party standing committee that worked tirelessly just below us here, a few floors down, to be able to make sure they got that right. I'm confident in their work, and I'm confident in the work of Minister of Justice has done on this. I think what you again are seeing is the official opposition doing everything they could to keep the AFL loophole open. They should have been shut 6 years ago when the Democratic Electoral Committee was struck by then Premier Notley. And it was one of the major PAC loopholes that were left open, which is why it was a commitment in the last election to Albertans that we would get that closed. And one of the things I'm most proud of in this legislative session is about 3 o'clock in the morning last night, the AFL loophole was closed.
Thank you. Jen.
Hi, Janet French from the CBC. I'm just going to ask you some forward-looking questions.
Sure.
So it seems like the pandemic and questions about the future of the leadership of your party were two really defining issues this year in politics. What do you see as being the defining issues for your government in 2022?
Well, I think you're seeing it already, and I can tell you this is what you hear at home every day. The economy and the jobs, is what matters, and that's why this government has been laser focused on it, will continue to be. We're seeing some of the best economic news in my generation in this province. And I strongly believe that this party will be judged in 2023 at the polls based on what happens with the economy and the management of fiscal affairs inside this province. Major reductions in deficits, the lowest taxes inside the country, tens of thousands of jobs coming online. That will be the message as we come out of the pandemic, and the fact that Alberta is not only going to have the largest recovery in its history, but is having the largest recovery in the country right now, will be leading the way as we should. I will say, I mean, certainly the pandemic has been amongst the biggest issues to deal with. I would say concerns about party leadership are primarily a focus of Twitter, and those are talking heads within our world. If you go back to the Sundry A&W, which is where I get my political advice from, what they're talking about right now is making sure we get Alberta back to work, making sure we get our pipelines built, and making sure we continue to stand up for the hardworking men and women of this province to make sure that Alberta can lead the way, both here at home, but also globally in future years, and that's exactly what's taking place.
Follow-up question?
Yeah, it sounds like with the re-election of the federal Liberal government, you and your government are still taking really divergent approaches to the environment and greenhouse gas emissions reduction. And, you know, some people who observe might describe your government's approach as combative with the federal government over some of these issues. So how well do you think that particular approach is serving Albertans? And do you see yourself continuing that approach going forward?
Well, first of all, I think that's a mistake to think that that's Alberta's primary position is just being combative. That said, we will be combative when it comes to defending the largest industry in this province. That is our responsibility. In my time as Environment Minister, we've gotten unprecedented equivalency agreements on methane, large emitters, technology innovation emission reduction program. And at the same time, what we've seen from the federal government is them be combative. The Prime Minister appointed a self-described activist as the federal environment minister, somebody who has done illegal activity to be able to block legitimate infrastructure being built inside this country. If that isn't combative, I don't know what would be. And while that's been happening, Alberta's government has been focused on following our technology innovation plan, working with industry to invest billions of dollars inside emission reduction technology in partnership with our industry, creating tens of thousands of jobs. And meanwhile, we still haven't seen anything from the federal government at all when it comes to investment inside the energy industry. This last year, you saw Alberta meet its targets on methane, which were more were further along than even the feds wanted to go when it went on methane. And that will tell you what that means, Janet, is Alberta is the only place inside the country that's meeting any targets on emissions reduction. And Ottawa's in the process of setting their 7th or 8th target in the last 10 years, and they still haven't even met their first one. So it's not that we're combative. We want Ottawa actually to get to work and to stop flying around the world talking to European elites, while not actually getting to work with provinces and the energy industry and other industries to be able to make sure that we can get this right, meet our environmental obligations, and protect jobs and make sure that we can have prosperity at the same time. And we can do both. We've proven that in Alberta for the last 20 years.
Thank you, operator. Please put through the first reporter.
Dan Singleton, the Albertan.
Oh, hi, Minister.
Hey, Dan.
Hey there. Looks like rural vaccination rates are still lagging quite a bit behind the urban ones, including in your riding. And I wonder how much of concern that is to you, or any plans to address that, the difference there going forward.
Well, overall, the province's overall vaccination rate is very high and very promising. And our constituency back home, Dan, just a few short months ago, we were about 40-some%, I believe, second dose. It's our constituency. Last I checked, we're over 70%. So you're seeing an increase in uptake inside the vaccine. I know Alberta Health Services is doing everything they can to make it available, have conversations about what concerns people may have that are vaccine hesitant. But right now, what I think is I want to thank everybody inside our constituency who's worked tirelessly to get those numbers back up, and as well as all Albertans as a whole that have worked really hard to get us through the fourth wave. And right now, I think that we need to just continue to make clear the vaccines are working, and that our main goal right now is to be able to make sure that the healthcare system continues to run and be able to protect the people that need it.
Follow-up question?
Yeah, another thing, trail management, you have put some new systems for this last term. Stakeholders have been telling you they're happy about those plans?
Yeah, we've been hearing from lots of stakeholder the groups on the trail side across some of the big ones like Alberta TrailNet, the Alberta Hiking Association, of course the Alberta Off-Highway Vehicle and the Snowmobile organizations. And back in the Mountain View County area, of course the Friends of the Eastern Slopes, Dan, are very excited with the work that's been taking place with the Trails Act. This was a promise made in the last election, and primarily made because of the requests from places like Mountain View County, Clearwater County, and Brazeau County that wanted to see the management of a place like the West Country differently. And so the Trails Act passing yesterday is a first major step to be able to make sure we can create a framework to work very closely with organizations like the Friends of the Eastern Slopes to protect our backyard, Dan, but then also to make sure that we can use it now while protecting it for future generations.
Operator, can you put through the next caller, please?
Graham Thompson, iPolitics.
Yeah, thanks for taking my call, Minister. I have a question for you. You're there as the government House leader. My question is in your role as Environment Minister. We saw a lot of extreme weather events. This summer we had a drought, of course, in Alberta. We had those dry conditions in British Columbia driving the forest fires, followed by the massive flooding a few weeks ago. Now, we have climate scientists saying that these extreme weather events are being driven by man-made climate change. I think you've been asked this question in the House before, but do you accept the scientific view that these extreme weather events, because you can't point to any one and say it's 100% climate change, but do you accept the science and from the experts saying that these extreme weather events are being driven by man-made climate change?
I do accept the science that man-made climate change is having impacts on the weather. I've answered that question many times in the House. In fact, I think I've probably answered it for you over the years, which is why Alberta's government continues to work tirelessly to move forward on GHG and emission management. The only jurisdiction in the country doing any major work on that, including the federal government. And so the answer to your question is yes.
Follow-up question?
Oh, I guess a follow-up. Just going back, of course, your role as government House leader, you talked about, of course, wrapping things up now, moving to next year. Will we have a new session next year? Will you have a speech from the throne in February and start over again? Or are you going to continue the the longest-running session in Alberta history.
Look, I believe that we'll likely have a throne speech in the spring, back on schedule where we usually do throne speeches in the Alberta legislature. That said, if anything the last 2 years has taught us is that we're in a very unpredictable moment. And we, of course, will not, we'll work with the Speaker's office and the Legislative Assembly office to be able to handle things like the ceremonial process of the throne speech in the most appropriate way. But it certainly is my intention to prorogue before we come back in the spring. That said, it may be possible that we may, because of the new fixed budget date process, that and I haven't made any decisions on this, Graham, but we may come back briefly and get the budget done, and then prorogue, and then would start a new session of throne speech just based on timing. But we finished at 3 o'clock in the morning last night, so we'll. I've been focused the last few weeks on finishing this session, and now I'll get to work on the next one.
Operator, can you put through the next caller, please?
Catherine Strowski, Alberta Today.
Good morning, Minister. I'm going to follow up on that prorogation question. Bill 86 is still on the order paper, and if you do prorogue, it would be wiped off. And I'm wondering if there's any plans to deal with that or to address electricity transmission costs, or what the plan is for that in the spring.
So Bill 86 is still on the order paper and remains a priority of the government, one, to clean up some of the mistakes that the previous government had with our electricity system, and then to concentrate on affordability issues. Minister Nally will have a lot more to say about that in the coming weeks, and I know is working tirelessly with stakeholders on that piece of legislation. You're right, if we prorogue, I would either have to reintroduce it, or you heard it here first, there's some other things I could use that nobody's ever probably thought of to actually resurrect it in the legislature. But we have the ability to just reintroduce that legislation, and we will. So it really would not be a factor in the decision to prorogue.
Follow-up question?
Yeah, on a different topic. Earlier in this week, you had said you'd be willing to use closure if the NDP was dragging out debate. But the last night, as we saw with your own MLAs, were trying to introduce amendments, including, referral amendments. So what was the rush in getting Bill 81 passed now, as opposed to referring it to committee and making sure all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted and everybody's happy? What was the rush in getting it passed last night?
Well, a couple things. First, Alberta doesn't have closure, hasn't had closure in decades. So I know that some of those terminologies is confusing for people who don't spend their time doing parliament work. But to be clear, there is no closure. Alberta does have time allocation, which is a decision of the legislature to decide how much time to spend on certain pieces of legislation. Many of the legislatures in the country, that decision is actually made in advance on every bill. Alberta's legislature has evolved to make a decision when you're in a spot where there is a stalemate and the majority is being blocked by the minority on making a decision. To be clear, why you would not want to send that bill to committee is that actually would make it die during prorogation and would be the wrong spot to send that legislation. It's already been to committee as well, by the way, for almost a year, and worked through a very robust standing committee process. So that would be a mistake, and frankly would keep big money in politics, would have stopped the setting of a fixed election date and other platform commitments within that legislation, and would have kept the AFL loophole open, something that was completely and utterly unacceptable to the majority of government members. As I said, we have a big tent coalition. Private members have the ability to be able to speak on behalf of their constituents, something that I work hard to make sure that they can do. And you saw private members move amendments last night. So there was amendments moved by those members and then a decision made by the majority of the chamber. As for time, on Bill 81, we clearly reached a point in the last week where nobody had anything new to say inside the chamber. And when that happens, that's what time allocation's for, to be able to make sure the chamber can to move it forward and allow the majority of MLAs to have their views expressed on a piece of legislation and be able to make sure we can move on doing the people's work.
Operator, you can put through the next caller, please.
Ashley Joanno, Post Media.
Hi, good morning. Everyone asked my proroguing question. So it's interesting to me that many of the bills that were passed won't have an immediate impact on things because we're still waiting for regulations and those sort of details. What do you say to criticism that the government didn't do enough to improve people's day-to-day lives immediately?
Well, I think that that criticism's not paying attention to what's taking place. I mean, I'll just leave it with this. I mean, $10 billion in investment in 16,000 jobs over the last few months. Legislation passed to be able to pave the way to be able to use minerals different to create work through that. Legislation passed to modernize the recycling system that has led to investments like Dow Chemical's new facility inside Fort Saskatchewan. The list goes on and on. What I say to people who want regulation simultaneously is that just simply they don't understand the legislative process, and that's okay. I get that. So we have to pass laws to be able to make the ability of a department to make regulations, and the regulations follow suit. That's how the sausage is made, and frankly, and the official opposition knows that. And this, that's just an official opposition talking point, trying to confuse people who don't understand the difference between statutory and regulatory.
Follow-up question?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Operator, you can put through the next caller, please.
Bellefontaine, CBC.
Good morning, Minister. Like you, I was up till 3 a.m. last night. I was watching what happened. So I have a question for you about Bill 81. It's basically the process that happened last night. So MLA Dave Hansen had an amendment to ensure that a party membership couldn't be sold without written consent from the person who was buying the membership. As he put it, just adding 7 words to the law. And he also told the House last night that Minister Maju, he told Minister Maju the day before that amendment was coming. So given that there was time allocation in committee as a whole last night, and that we saw UCP MLAs and cabinet ministers, in particular Minister McIver, Joseph Scow, Minister Maju, basically trying to talk, and what the opposition was saying was basically eating up that hour of committee of the whole, which prevented Mr. Hansen from introducing his amendment. What do you say to Albertans about this?
Well, first of all, every member of the legislature has a right to speak, and so no, I would not ever stop any member of the legislature from speaking, particularly a government caucus member, of which MLA Scow would be, who has a right to speak in the chamber, and that's how it needs to be. If I would assume, and MLA Hansen did not raise any detailed concerns with me last night, and I did see him many times between that point at 3 o'clock in the morning, that if MLA Hansen was concerned about time allocation moving, he would not have voted for it. He did vote for it, so I don't think there was any concern from that perspective. I will point out from that point on, there are several more hours of debate on that legislation. What I make of it is that we got a big tent coalition. We will always do everything we can to be able to make sure that each member can express diverging views when they take place. It's very rare that has to happen, and that we're proud to be part of a party that has the ability to do that. Mr. Hansen has the ability to say that. But the majority of MLAs, again, very full benches last night at 3 o'clock in the morning, expressing solidarity and support with this legislation. At the end of the day, that's democracy, and the majority has to make a decision when it comes to this legislation. As for specifically wanting to put a clause like that in the bill, again, it was, as the Justice Minister has pointed out, very problematic from a legal structure. Interfering with private clubs is not something the legislature could do. This could have had significant impacts on political parties that are not even in the chamber and would not have been able to express concerns about that, including parties that give away memberships within their structure. It is not the job of the chamber in any way to interfere with other political parties or private clubs. I want to be clear, though, the United Conservative Party already has bylaws and rules against buying memberships for other people as outside of against spouses and minor children. So I'll just say, Michelle, this is a big tent coalition. I'm proud to be part of a party that can allow different views to be expressed in the legislature and in caucus.
Follow-up question?
Yeah, I mean, watching that, what happened, I mean, Minister McIver, Joseph Scow was arguing with the chair, who was Angela Pitt, who was in the chair at the time. I think you got into a little bit of a verbal altercation, a very, very brief one with her. But, Minister, somebody watching this and seeing what's going on, and, you guys got called out on it. And, what do you say to Albertans when if they were to watch that last night and to see what happened and to hear what happened? Do you guys really feel that, you're really upholding democracy here? One of your own members, who had what seems to be a pretty reasonable amendment, wasn't able to introduce it.
Well, again, here's what I'll hear from Albertans, is they want us to get to work, and on that particular piece of legislation, stop the AFL loophole. What I'd say to Albertans is we watched democracy in action last night. 87 members of the legislature are elected to make decisions on behalf of Albertans. You can't let a bill last forever inside the legislature, and those members made decisions. I'm proud to be part of a province and a country where democracy rules the day, and so anybody watching last night got to see democracy in action, and any time that the legislature gets to do that, I think is a proud day for the Alberta legislature.
I think we have another question from the floor from Janet French.
I'm back, Janet from the
Janet.
CBC. Just to follow up again on Bill 81, I mean, several of the MLAs last night, from multiple stripes, made the point that Bill 81 legalizes the very membership practices that your party is under investigation for by the RCMP. I'm wondering, how democratic do you think that looks, and what do you say to those allegations?
Well, first of all, those allegations are ridiculous. Again, our party has strict rules in place for how memberships have to be purchased, how IDs have to be shown when you vote, different ways that pins are done, and accountability associated with that. This does not legalize processes that would be illegal. So if people are saying that, that would be not true. Buying somebody a membership, submitting their ID to be able to vote would be fraud and already against the law. We don't need to change the Elections Act to deal with things that have already dealt with in other acts, either from the House of Commons or from us. To be clear, the legislature does not pass legislation specifically with one political party. There are political parties in this country who give away memberships. If the NDP or the United Conservative Party decided tomorrow everybody could have a membership, they could do that. It's a private club. They set the price. That's how it should be. We have to make sure that the legislation that leaves the legislature allows all political parties to be able to operate. And lastly, Janet, to be clear again, that is already against the bylaws and the rules of the United Conservative Party to buy memberships for other people, with the exception of your direct spouse and minor children.
Last question.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking a lot about the technicalities, though. I mean, we all know that once information is disseminated in the greater realm, it's about appearances. And I'm wondering how you think this looks to change this election financing law in the context of the past 4 years.
The official opposition, when they were government, brought in an election act every session that they were there to directly manipulate many components of the system to hurt their opponents. Including interfering with local constituency associations and nominations. Our party has not done that approach. Instead, has had a significant select special committee of the legislature, all parties who worked together to provide recommendations that went into creating that bill. And at the end of the day, what I would say to Albertans, and I can tell you, nobody in my constituency is going to ask me this question, but if I was asked in the Sundry A&W, I'd say you could be proud of your government that they finally fulfilled the commitment of shutting the AFL loophole. And at the end of the day, the loudest voices against this are the official opposition, who are desperate to keep that loophole open. And last night it passed the legislature, and I suspect Her Honour, the Lieutenant Governor, will give it royal assent sometime this afternoon. And I think my constituents would be very happy to hear that we fulfill our commitments and our promises to Albertans when it comes to democracy.
Thank you, everyone.
Awesome.